said near the beginning of your talk that writing is for you a kind of practice.
Practice, yeah.
And I can't really, make sense
Can't
of that
make
because
sense
it's all with words and concepts. So I would be glad if you.
It's always words and concepts.
Writing. Well,
Well, that's one way of looking at it, I suppose. But that's certainly not my experience. Writing or making art, and for me they're just different ways of doing the same thing. When I'm working on a collage, I'm working on a book, I'm in the same frame of mind. This is where it gets to be a practice, because to write, I need to get myself into a zone which is very similar to what I get in when I sit on a cushion in meditation. That's where the writing stems from. Yes, it's true, it works with words and concepts, but in order to write, I need to get in touch with a process that is very difficult to articulate, that begins to come forth in words, in concepts, but as a practice, it's about getting in touch and engaging and setting in motion a kind of flow. So that I write from 9 to 1 every morning when I'm working on a book. And I sit at my desk pretty much unbroken for 4 hours, and I don't notice the time go. I am totally in this flow, completely. And I'm also endlessly surprised. When I sit down at 9 o'clock at my desk and I face what Hemingway called the horror of the blank sheet of paper, or nowadays the horror of the blank computer screen, I don't know what is going to be on that screen 4 hours later. I have a rough idea, because it's got to follow from what I've written before. I've got maybe a sketch or a plan in my head. I might even have scribbled down a few notes. But once I embark on the process of writing itself, I have to let go of my desires and my wishes and give myself over to what I call the logic of the text. Now, I don't mean logic in a dry sense here, but I find that as I start writing, I start saying things that I had not thought of before at all. I find that if I write one sentence, then I've somehow set the precondition for what the next sentence will be. And the text begins to take over. So that I find myself following where the logic of the text is taking me, and at the end of the morning, I'll have something on that piece of paper which has never been written before by anyone. And it will contain things in it, often understandings and insights that I didn't have at 9 in the morning. Now, this is a practice, as far as I'm concerned. It's not just the idea that a writer just sits at a desk and transcribes all of his or her brilliant ideas is nonsense. It might be the case for some people. That's not my experience at all. And then during the afternoon and the evening, I don't write. I do other stuff. But throughout that period, I'm aware that some process is going on beneath the surface of consciousness. It sometimes appears as flashes of insight. When I meditate, I often get answers to the problems I'm dealing with in the writing. I sleep on it, and the next morning I come back to it afresh, and it's been working and continuing unconsciously throughout that period, and I then pick up the threads again and go on. So it's like a kind of a feedback loop that's going on through time. And to me that is not only a practice, but it's also the activity that makes me most fully alive, makes my life, in a sense, full of richness and meaning. It's a wonderful thing to do. And I find that the meditation training that I've received and the practices I do contribute very much to the discipline I need as a writer. Artwork, ditto, same thing. And it's a journey, it's a quest. You don't know where it's going at all. And in that sense, it is a path. It's a way. And it has no conclusion. I mean, I've been writing constantly since the age now of about 21, 22. I've always had a book on the go. It's part of my life. I can't imagine my life without that. It's integral to who I am.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a follow-up.
Yeah. Okay.
Would you describe your state of mind as mindful when you write in a traditional, like, Buddhist sense of the word, say, sati? Because it's maybe what I was getting out of your question is that I find it fairly difficult to be mindful when I write.
Well, mindfulness, you see, if you think of mindfulness as always involving a degree of recul, a degree of detachment, a degree of distance, then this is not the same thing. There's no distance when I'm engaged in writing. It's a totally immersive process. I'm not sitting back observing or judging what I'm doing. I'm just opening myself. And that's where I think the similarity is. It's about a letting go of your reactive patterns. And that's what mindfulness enables, to not buy into what I want, what I desire, what I fear, all of the chatter of the mind. That dies down. When I'm writing, there's none of that. So in that sense, it's contemplative, it's meditative. But I'm not holding myself as an observer, watching it, attending to it, being mindful of it. I'm allowing that space to be held as a free and open space in which this work, painting, or collage or writing, is allowed to flow forth freely without hindrance or obstruction. And that to me is just another way of describing the process of the 4 tasks in the practice of the Dharma. Without reducing, therefore, meditation to a specific, exercise in something called mindfulness. It has to do with engaging the totality of my energies as a person and focusing them in the accomplishment of this work. Yes?
I can very easily follow your creative impulse and the flow. But for me, then it's a contradiction when you decide to use the random process, like in the 12-tone music.
Mm.
You make the decision,
Yeah.
and then you put it in this process, and for me it's a total contradiction of the flow, of the creating in the flow.
Well, maybe. It's true, of course, that I set up the rules. And to that extent, the rules are not random. I set those in advance. But I don't think it's a contradiction in the sense that, let's think of it this way, what gets in the way of the flow? What gets in the way of the flow is your own kind of your own willfulness for things to be a particular way, your own choices and your own decisions. That to me is what hinders the flow of the creative process. Chance operations are basically overriding that willfulness. That's the only reason I use them. So that they take away something that would otherwise establish a pattern and a set of choices on the work which would not be part of the flow because they would be part of what I want. So in that sense, they facilitate the letting go of my own egotistic impulses. So I don't find that a contradiction at all.
But you still keep the 8 and the 4s and the 8
Yeah.
all of this
Absolutely.
Is still very...
It's extremely formal, it's extremely rigid, I totally agree. But the paradox in this process is that I have found more and more that creativity and freedom operate optimally under conditions of constraint. It's what gets, if you don't have any formal structure, it's just chaos. So I want to find, what I'm really looking for is a balance between order, between cosmos and chaos, between order and randomness. I'm trying to find a kind of synthesis of the two. And that's an ongoing quest. And I keep exploring new ways of doing it. But it's really just a discipline. It's a bit like the discipline of going on a retreat. You know, you have a schedule, you have all these rules, all these things you can and can't do. And yet the aim of that is to allow you to uncover your own deepest freedom. Is that not a contradiction too? It would be exactly the same kind of thing, as I would see it. Yes?
Yeah. So, going back to the collage,
Yeah.
on the book, I understand the meaning in the framework,
Uh-huh.
but do both inform each other as well from a content point of view?
I'm sorry, what both here?
The collage?
Oh, the collage?
The book.
Well, the book is a collage. In that
I
sense.
understand from the kind of framework point
Yeah.
of view, but from the content.
The content. You mean the actual material in the book itself? Do I talk
the book
about...
itself and the collage itself.
Are you saying, do I talk about the collage process in the book?
What I'm asking is, do they inform each other from a content point of view?
I still don't fully understand what you mean.
Inspire.
Inspire, yeah.
Does it influence?
Well, yes, basically. Though I don't think it is. I haven't thought of it in those terms. But yes. In fact, the book, now once I made all my chance operations and organised the chapters, I then actually created a collage that mirrors the book. In other words, one of the chance... Oh, it gets so complicated to talk about this. You see, each of the chapters too, I randomly assigned a colour. Red, yellow, white, blue, which are the 4 primary Buddhist colours. So the whole thing is already from the outset imagined in my mind according to sequences of primary colours. Most of my collage work at the moment is just working with primary colours. White, yellow, red, blue. That's all I use. And so the book is already represented in, theoretically as colour, although I didn't decide which chapter got which colour. I did that by chance operations. And so what I've been able to do, therefore, is actually produce a collage using all of the colours on bits of card, which I've done. I've now got the thing in a visual form. I can look at the collage of the book and I can tell exactly which chapter is where and so on. That's a crazy thing to do, but this is my weird life.
How much were you inspired by postmodern literature and poetry? Because that's exactly what postmodern poets do.
To some degree, yes. I mean, I do draw from that aspect of our contemporary culture. And my brother is an artist living in London, and I am very, to some degree through him, involved in the latest sort of works in contemporary art. I like contemporary art, well, some of it, not all of it. But and I do enjoy the way modernism and postmodernism have really sought to rethink the whole way in which we do poetry and art. So yes, I'm fully aware that, and that's why I call it an art project. This is a modernist or postmodernist art project, quite definitely. And so in that case, absolutely yes. Another influence that I wasn't really conscious of being an influence are the sequence of novels by Karl Ove Knausgaard.
Oh.
With a rather attractive title, Mein Kampf. These are 6 novels, a total of 3,000 pages. in which he describes in intimate detail the ordinary things of his daily life. And that book I read that book throughout this process too. I'm now reading the last volume that's just come out in English. That I realise is actually probably Knausgaard's work, novelistic work, I think also has had an impact on what I've been doing. I think there's influences all over the place. Yeah. Yes.
I'm wondering whether, when the book is published, will people have the story that we have had tonight? Will that be an important part of it, or will they just be reading this rather odd book?
No. Well, it can't be that odd, or they wouldn't have agreed to publish it. It actually probably doesn't read as strangely as you might think it might. It weirdly actually reads. Many people have read it and find that it doesn't read. It's not difficult to read at all. It actually flows very well. But I have written quite a long introduction, largely at the behest of my editor, to give some of the background. Probably not quite as much as I told you, but nonetheless, I do frame it with a quite... I talk about my visits to these... I talk a lot of what I said here, I do include in the introduction, yes.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I find intriguing, so the book won't be published until sometime in 2020, right? So you've probably never been in that position before, because, you publish more usually, like you had in advance and all of that kind of stuff. So suddenly, there's a 2-year period.
It's a little less than that, it's about just a year and a half.
Okay, a year and a half period, which is completely unusual, because generally the book is put to bed and then you can start the next one, right?
Yeah.
But here, one is sort of, still around. Is it going to be difficult to start something over?
It's a good question. I actually don't know. I have agreed with my editor that we must have a final text that won't change by the end of this year. There's still a little bit of tinkering to do. And Cindy, my editor, will give me some editorial feedback. But I want that to be finished within a couple of months. There's really little more to do. She's quite happy with it. But yeah, there'll be a bit of tinkering. And I've already started on other projects. So that's... The trouble is, you see, I'm still somewhat unclear as to what I'm going to be writing now. I do have a plan to collaborate on a book with an evolutionary biologist, a professor in Zurich actually. And we're going to write a book where he's going to present an evolutionary biological understanding of how humans came to be the way they are, and I'm going to couple that with my own secular interpretation of Buddhism as a response to the evolutionary condition in which we find ourselves. So that's my next book project, which will probably take 2 or 3 years to do. So I've got other things going on. I can't really, I'm a compulsive person. I can't really stop. But it is a good question. I'm wondering what it'll be like in the middle of next year to have this book coming out that could cause me all kinds of problems. That is, still sort of sitting, invisible to the world. We'll see. Thank you. Yes.
I have
a practical question.
Yeah. So, as a Buddhist practitioner, would you recommend experimenting what you
plant medicines?
Plant medicines?
I would not broadly, recommend. No, it would depend very much on the person, the particular person, and where that person is at in their lives and in their practice. And I may, yes, if it seemed appropriate, suggest that this could be something they might explore. I'm aware more and more that there is a growing, slightly under the radar community all over Europe and the West now of people who are beginning to revisit these psychedelic experiences. And I think we're moving into a whole new relationship, a whole new way of understanding these things. And I know that there are a lot of Buddhists who are interested in this stuff. But I wouldn't make a sort of blanket blanket recommendation. Ayahuasca must be given away free with school meals. No. But I am aware that this is what might get me into trouble, because a lot of Buddhists, this is basically breaking the fifth precept. And there's in fact an article just come out in the new Tricycle magazine by Brad Warner, who's taking an attack against the use of psychedelics by Buddhist practitioners and rejecting that it has anything to do with what we call the practice of Dharma. So there's a debate happening, and I think that's not a bad thing, frankly. But again, it's something that's going to play itself out more and more in the next, I think, 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
It's a related question. Why did you not revisit LSD? What made you want to taste the plants?
Well, it wasn't just the plants, it was the plants and the ceremonial setting.
Right.
It was those two things together, really. I think there might have been a slightly romantic idea of ingesting, natural products rather than synthetic substances. I did feel, again, it sounds a bit mystical, but somehow relating to these plants, these substances that are growing naturally in the earth. They're part of ourselves in a way. We're also emerging from the same biological origins. In fact, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, exists in trace elements in the human body already. It's not artificial in any sense. It's already in us. There are speculations that these trace elements of DMT might have to do with near-death experiences, dreaming. Who knows? They don't quite know why the human body has elements of a psychedelic drug already within it. LSD is a manufactured drug based on the rye mold ergot. So it's quite apart from human experience. So that's one thing, but it's the ceremonial aspect
Right.
that was actually more important.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, and then you think.
Would it be possible to give like a little idea of what this new book you're going to be writing about?
Which one? The biology book?
With the evolutionary biologist about what?
Well, no, this is very much a work in progress, and we've just Mark, my collaborator, Dr. Mark Mescher, he's at, what's that place in Zurich called? ETH? He's a research biologist in ETH. We've known each other for 20 years, and we've talked about this stuff a lot, and we've now decided to start setting down materials in writing that will then eventually bring together into a single volume. But we haven't got anywhere near enough to be able to answer your question. I don't know how that's going to play out. We'll see. Yes.
Well, I want one similar question that was already asked, but the other question is, how does that all bring us back to the art of solitude?
Well, the evolution.
No, the whole process you were talking about, trying to draw the lessons practically, or like where does that leave us with solitude and the art of solitude?
The art of solitude. I'm using the word art I'm playing on the ambiguity. We could say the art of solitude, like the art of cooking. It's the skill, the ability to do cooking. The art of solitude is the skill or the ability to practice solitude. But I'm also aware that the word art, Kunst, means art. So I also see this book as a work of art. And I reflect upon the artistic process with Agnes Martin, with the paintings of Vermeer, and I see the book itself as somehow mirroring that artistic vision as well. This is not a book in which I don't make any arguments in this book. I'm not trying to tell you what solitude is by reasoned reflection and argument. I'm trying to show you solitude. I'm not interested in telling, I'm interested in showing. Do you understand the difference? I'm not trying to persuade anyone of anything in this book, which is quite different from all my other books, which are basically, you know, sort of are polemics. Really, they're arguments. You know, Buddhism actually means this. And if you don't think so, you're wrong. You know, blah 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 blah. I'm not doing that anymore. I've let go of that. What I want to do in this book is actually not explain what solitude is, and people have tried to do that, and it's not terribly interesting actually, but to actually show it in its different manifestations. So that's where we're left. We're left with the book itself, the work of art itself, if it aspires to that, and that is enough, right? So unfortunately, you're going to have to wait till February 2020 to see whether it actually works or whether I'm completely barking up the wrong tree. I don't know. Yes?
Did you do or consider dark retreats?
Dark retreat?
Dark retreats, where you go totally alone into the dark for a period of time?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I've never done that.
But you know of them?
What?
But you know of them?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me it would be maybe similar to your cave.
It is,
The
yes.
feeling.
There is a sense of going, yeah, I see what... Going into, these are the Bardo retreats you get in the Tibetan tradition, right? I've never done these, and I've never been particularly drawn to them. But in some ways, what came closer to this was the second ayahuasca ceremony was done effectively in the dark, overnight, with only one candle in a large room. It was very, very dark. So that, in a sense, did bring me into a quality of solitude in which I couldn't really see anything. It was minimal light. Stefan,
Yeah.
do you have a question, or are we going to wrap it up?
No, I have a just what I said about going against the stream, and I think the solitude part is something that's going against the stream in terms of where our society is moving, and we have these things that help us never experience solitude, or even I think it also stresses the differentiation you made also, Einsamkeit or actually Alleinsein. I think it's probably more what you're talking about,
Yeah.
and that we live in a society where we are this experience is often
Is
perceived as well unpleasant and to be avoided, and
That's
I
right.
also reminds me of Blaise Pascal's quote.
Yeah, Pascal said that the root of all human suffering is our inability to stay alone in a room. To stay alone in a room.
Oh, yeah, there's really something to that, no?
There is,
Yeah.
absolutely. I know, I am aware of that. I don't address that particular topic in the book, but again, but it's true. I think that it's quite. I find more and more when I talk of solitude in public talks like this, or talking with friends or whatever, it immediately engages people. In English, the word solitude is a very beautiful word, and it doesn't get confused with loneliness. In French, it's difficult. La solitude is very ambiguous. Even in Montaigne, it's sometimes still thought of as a terrible thing. In fact, Victor Hugo said that he said if you want to know what hell is, it is found in the single word solitude. which is not what I'm meaning at all, obviously. So I'm aware of the fact that we live in a society in which solitude is getting banished, in which solitude is becoming somehow undesirable, somehow not something one needs to really concern oneself with, that if you like solitude, you're probably antisocial, you're probably not a very friendly person. It's looked on purely negatively. So hopefully this book will also show the beauty of solitude. And also not solitude as a kind of cutting oneself off from the world. This is something I feel is also misunderstood. I have a very beautiful quote that I use virtually at the very end of the book by Nelson Mandela. Mandela spent 27 years in solitude, not by his own choice clearly, but he came to terms with it and then began to realize the benefits of it. He said it's only in the silence of solitude that you can really appreciate the power that language has to affect the lives of people. It's a beautiful statement. It's very beautiful. And that too, I think, is where if we dismiss solitude or prevent it or flood it with other stuff, we actually cut ourselves off from the very source of a great deal of our moral and ethical awareness. I don't think it's about withdrawing from the world at all. I think it's about finding a space within oneself, and I think the same is exactly the same with meditation, is that we open up a sensitized, still, solitary space, but one in which we're able to be that much more open, that much more transparent to the suffering of the world, I feel. So that is a thread that also I do run through the book, and that's kind of where the book comes to a conclusion. It comes back to community, it comes back to our participation in the world. Though actually, now you mention this, I originally conceived of this project as composed of two books. One, The Art of Solitude, and another, The Art of Care. And I saw them as dyads. A lot of my collages have been dyads recently, and that's actually what gave originally the idea of two books. And I might still do that. Thank you for reminding me. I'm thinking of, that is a project I might do at some point, but not immediately, is do a similar book along similar lines, maybe exactly the same number of words, exactly the same structure, but focusing entirely on care, how we care for one another, how we care for ourselves. So that would complement and balance out the solitude book. But I've kind of forgot, as obviously that didn't even come into my mind as I was speaking. But that was actually the initial idea. Okay. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Irene.
I can't help thinking of that as well. You were a Zen monk.
Yeah.
And you now using your book project, you use a very strong formal structure.
Yeah.
Which you rely upon, and within it there is this immense creativity.
Yeah.
And is this also an aspect of revisiting a place in your life to use this form and put it into a book?
You mean place in my life being Zen monastery?
Yes.
I think that's true. I'd not actually thought of that, but it's certainly the case that one of the reasons I left the Tibetan tradition and I went to South Korea and entered into a Zen monastery there. One of the reasons I was drawn to Zen was because it gave value to the arts. And it's the only Buddhist tradition that really treats art as an integral form of practice. And it's true. There's a lot of like Zen calligraphy, for example. it looks very spontaneous, but actually it's highly formalistic. And I remember once Martine and I, we visited a monk in our monastery, and he had this beautiful calligraphy on the wall, just of a single Chinese ideogram. And we asked him, who did that one? And he said, well, it's this lady I know who lives in Seoul. If you want to go and see her, I'll give you her address. And so we went to see this lady. She's an artist, but she was just a housewife, living in an apartment block in Seoul. A lovely woman. And she said, okay, no, you'll be welcome to come and see me, and I'll talk to you about my calligraphy work. So we went into her apartment, and then she said, well, this is where I do the work, and I'm in the middle of doing something now, so just sit there and I'll show you what I do. And that day, she was just doing one particular ideogram, I forget which one. She sat down on a cushion like this. She had a pile of blank sheets of paper, her ink stone and the ink that she had ground, and her brush, and she would sit there and she would get into effectively a meditative state, and she'd pick up the brush, put it there, and then she'd do it again, and 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 occasionally she'd say, that one works. Now, for you and me, they all look kind of the same. But for her, that one somehow worked. Now, I think I would understand that in the terms you were suggesting, namely that she's working within a highly formal structure. That these spontaneous brushstrokes have to follow very strict rules. How many strokes, relation between the different parts, and all classical Asian calligraphy is very formal. And yet you work towards using that form in a way that you can somehow achieve an extraordinary degree of spontaneity and freedom. So yes, I would see my book again following that kind of model. So possibly that came from there. It's a good point. I'd not thought of it before. I might build it into the text. No, it's true. That form of art has certainly influenced me a great deal. It's the same with Tibetan thangkas too. Very, very formal. And you might think they're always just painting by numbers. But actually it's not. A good Tibetan artist expresses extraordinary freedom in that highly constrained thangka form. If you look at a really good thangka as opposed to what you buy on the markets in Kathmandu, there's a world of difference. Some of these artists are just masters of line, masters of composition and vitality and colour. It's incredible. But again, it's highly formal. And yet that constraint, I feel, can optimize and channel our spontaneity and freedom. It sounds strange, but I'm quite convinced of that. It's 9 o'clock. If it's okay, I'm going to go home. Meaning the meditation centre in Beatenberg. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.